Well, not the first call for civil war. Now, issues around land reform have come to the fore in the National Assembly on Monday afternoon, with members of Parliament debating the willing buyer, willing seller policy. The National Freedom Party initiated the debate by calling for government to invoke limitation rights in the Constitution to speed up land reform, which it says is happening at a snail's pace. The Economic Freedom Fighters has reiterated the party's controversial stance that land should be expropriated without compensation. However, the Freedom Front Plus leader, Pieter, says that land reform is not failing because of the willing seller, willing buyer policy, but rather because of incompetent officials and corruption. Now, for more on this story, in our Pretoria studios, we are joined by Professor Lesiba Tefo from Unisa. Professor, very good morning to you and welcome.
Good morning to you and the listeners.
Now, you have been following this land debate for some time now. Is it going anywhere, though?
Yeah,
Professor, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Professor, can you hear me now?
I missed the question.
Okay. I just want to check with you, Professor. You've been following this debate in relation to land for quite a while now. Is this debate going anywhere?
And not only listening, but participated and also published on this subject. And the latest will be an article, scientific article, in the next two months. But the issue here is, we talk as if there is no enabling legislation, right, to address this matter. The Constitution and legislation is in place to enable us to do exactly what needs to be done. And it even goes further to say, if there is need, the government can appropriate land and determine the appropriate fee that needs to be paid for that land. So you don't need reckless statements like land without a compensation, reckless statement like there will be bloodshed. Those are irresponsible statements. When they fail in Parliament to convince one another, they mustn't play games that may end up leading us, the nation, into a situation where we may regret why we were where we are.
Now, the National Freedom Party initiated this debate saying that the willing seller, willing buyer, willing seller policy is happening at a snail's pace. According to your observation, how true is that?
Look, we talk about the land as if the blacks are not in charge, are not in control. At one level, you know, there is a man called Emil Cabral who spoke about the compradors, liberation heroes who move into Parliament only to perpetuate the status quo. The ANC has the legislation, has numbers, and all it needs is a political will to do the right thing. One, we must also not shy away from some of the reasons that make perhaps the ANC or the government a little wary and steady in appropriating land with reasonable compensation. Because the question is, what happened to the land given to the blacks since 1994? Mm-hmm. Now, very little can be said in the positive about that.
Now, when we spoke,
very little can be said that has come out valuably out of that.
Now, when we spoke to the Freedom Front Plus earlier, they indicated that there is enough land in this country for everybody, but there's not a land order that indicates what land belongs to who, and that the whites do not have all the land. Do you agree with him?
Most of the land, according to the research, belongs to the state. It belongs to the state. And if the state had applied its mind to that, it would be reasonably easy to avail space. It will always be challenges when it comes to land, because when you say where is the land, it is in the countryside. Where people want land is in the metropoles, in the cities. That's where people are driven to. But if you develop, like the late Professor Herbert Vilakazi would say, develop the rural, the hinterlands, put the infrastructure, give them the necessary equipment to develop in terms of agricultural activity, you will stem the tide towards the main cities. The land belongs to the state in the main, but there are whites who are beginning to appreciate that they've got more than enough, which is a basis perhaps for conflict and discontent, who are willing to share that land. But equally, you've got the likes of Groenewald, who think what they have, they must own up and they must keep. And he makes one shameful statement that says, we did favors to blacks by giving them mirrors and this and that for them to give us land. I don't want to go back into that debate. It is archaic and less helpful.
Now, but staying with that debate, though, because Dr. Pieter Groenewald's response to this discussion, he mentioned civil war as the alternative if land is taken without compensation. What do you make of that, and is that perhaps the way to go?
He's very irresponsible, I must say. I would have loved to engage him on this one and to remind him of the late Ter Blanche, and also to remind of my countrymen who came from Limpopo driving to Northwest to try to defend the call for ownership of land by the whites through the guy from Ventersburg, Eugene Ter Blanche. Eugene Ter Blanche. You remember what happened to the white fellows in that bluish Mercedes-Benz. I hate to recall that scene. The likes of Groenewald, it's about time they retire and allow the young ones who can engage on the basis of reason and logic. That's a reckless statement. There are no whites, in my view today, who have an appetite for a civil war. White people and young ones in particular are willing to share the space and the resources to the extent possible and within the confines of the law. And I advocate for that. Just
in conclusion, Professor, and very briefly, what is the solution then? How do we deal with this land issue in a fair and justified manner?
The government must take the lead. And it must use the laws that are available at disposal. Otherwise, it will allow opportunists, political opportunists, to stem in and derail them. That's number one. White folks who have more than enough land, they must also avail that land at reasonable cost. Number three, land ownership by foreigners make land too expensive for my people to access it. Land ownership, as the Guto Commission said in 2002, must be suspended when it comes to for white fellows. And where land is given to the blacks, let's give them capacity to till the land and to make it productive. Otherwise, we'll keep saying the blacks cannot till the land. The blacks want money rather than the land, precisely because we don't give them the necessary support.
Professor, thank you so much for your time and joining us here in our Pretoria studios there. Professor Lesiba Tefo is from Unisa. So, that's the question, of course, that we pose to you as well today. Do you think that we can resolve this issue without bloodshed, the issue of land in this country? That's the question. Let us know on the Twitter handle as well as on the Facebook page. But right now, it's time to talk sports with Eben and Kendall.